from England, and he was claimed that Srila Prabhupada's Bombay quarters were fit for India. The king of Indra, the king of heaven, Srila Prabhupada broke into a big sustained smile. And Tamal Krishna, after being absent for a few hours, returned before Prabhupada explained, I was just resting because I was tired from the trip. Srila Prabhupada replied by teasing him, you already rested on the plane, you just like to sleep, especially in the car. Krishna asked Prabhupada if he would see any important guests. Prabhupada replied that he would only see Mr. Bogilal Patel and Mr. Mahadevya if they came. A few minutes later, as if summoned, Mr. Mahadevya showed up and was brought before Prabhupada. Although usually very talkative, Mr. Mahadevya seemed too shocked by Srila Prabhupada's appearance to speak as freely as usual. At Prabhupada's request, however, he described the present political climate in India. So this is just a couple of months before Prabhupada passed away, and he's very emaciated. So this Mr. Mahadevya was very shocked to see Prabhupada in his physical condition. Srila Prabhupada asked to be raised up, and he showed an unusual amount of interest in the report. Reaching the point, he said, the whole world this is the disease of the body. One party is no better than the other. It is still one side or the other what they can do. Though Prabhupada was not able to go down to the temple for seeing Radha Rasvihari, he daily asked to see their picture, which he would look upon lovingly. He could also hear the Arti Kirtans coming from the temporary temple. Then one day, he asked that the framed picture of Radha Rasvihari be fixed on his bedpost so that he could see them always. On awakening one morning, Prabhupada immediately began talking. Every living entity is suffering. From Brahma down to the ant, there is no happiness. And then he closed his eyes. Later he awoke and said, Daivi Hiesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya. Tamal Krishna asked Prabhupada if he was thinking of these things while resting. Yes, Prabhupada replied, I was dreaming. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Interesting, the viewpoint of the pure devotee. Sometimes people want to worship demigods to live amongst the demigods, but Prabhupada here is saying that they're suffering also. They just have a greater degree of relief. They say that there's no positive pleasure in the material world, it's only relief from material distress. So they seem to have more relief, that's all. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Read from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 18, the residents of Jambudvip offer prayers, text 13. Harir Hi Shakshad Bhagavan Sharirinam. Harir Hi Shakshad Bhagavan Sharirinam. Atma Jasanam Iva Toyam Ipshitam. Atmajasanam Iva Toyam Ipsitam. Hidva Mahams Tam Yadi Sajate Grihe. Hidva Mahams Tam Yadi Sajate Grihe. Tada Mahatvam Vayasa Dampitinam. Tada Mahatvam Vayasa Dampatinam. Harir Hi Shakshad Bhagavan Sharirinam. Harir Hi Shakshad Bhagavan Sharirinam. Atma jasanam ivatoyam ipshitam. Atma jasanam ivatoyam ipsitam. Hidvamaham stam yadi sajjate grihe. Hidvamaham stam yadi sajjate grihe. Tada mahatvam vayasa dampatinam. Tada mahatvam vayasa dampatinam. Harihi Sakshat Bhagavan Shariram. Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam. Hidvamaham Stam Yadi Sajjate Grihe. Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam. Please chant.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam. Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Nitsitam. Itva Mahamsam Yadi Sajjate Grihe. Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Hikvamahamstam Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Hidvamaham Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasa Dam.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Hidvamaham Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Hidvamaham Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Hari Sakshat Bhagavan Sharirinam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Atma Jasanam Ivatoyam Ipsitam.
Hidvamaham Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Hidvamaham Yadi Sajjate Grihe.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Tada Mahatvam Vayasadam Patinam.
Hari, the Lord, He certainly, Sakshat, directly, Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sharirinam, of all living entities who have accepted material bodies, Atma, the life and soul, Jasanam, of the aquatics, Eva, like Toyam, the vast water, Ipshitam, is desired, Hitva, giving up, Mahan, a great personality, Tam, him, Yadi, if Sajjate, become detached, Grihe, to household life, Tada, at that time, Mahatvam, greatness, Vayasa, by age, Dampatinam, of the husband and wife. Translation. Just as aquatics always desire to remain in the vast mass of water All conditioned living entities naturally desire to remain in the vast existence of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, if someone very great by material calculations fails to take shelter of the Supreme Soul, but instead becomes attached to material household life, his greatness is like that of a young low-class couple. One who is too attached to material life loses all good spiritual qualities. Please repeat. Just as aquatics always desire to remain in the vast mass of water, all conditioned living entities naturally desire to remain in the vast existence of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, if someone very great by material calculations fails to take shelter of the Supreme Soul, but instead becomes attached to material household life, his greatness is like that of a young low-class couple. One who is too attached to material life loses all good spiritual qualities. Prabhupada's purport. Although crocodiles are very fierce animals, they are powerless when they venture out of the water onto land. When they are out of the water, they cannot exhibit their original power. Similarly, the all-pervading Supratal Paramatma is the source of all living entities, and all living entities are part and parcel of him. When the living entity remains in contact with the all-powerful Vasudeva, the Personality of Godhead, manifests his spiritual power exactly as a crocodile exhibits its strength in the water. In other words, the greatness of the living entity can be perceived when he is in the spiritual world, engaged in spiritual activities. Many householders, although well educated in the knowledge of the Vedas, become attached to family life. They are compared herein to crocodiles out of water, for they are devoid of all spiritual strength. Their greatness is like that of a young husband and wife who, though uneducated, praise one another and become attracted to their own temporary beauty. This kind of greatness is appreciated only by low-class men with no qualifications. Everyone should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Soul, the source of all living entities. No one should waste his time in the so-called happiness of materialistic household life. In the Vedic civilization, this type of crippled life is allowed only until one's 50th year, when one must give up family life and enter either the order of Vanaprastha, independent retired life for cultivation of spiritual knowledge, or sannyas, the renounced order in which one completely takes shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Agyanatimarandasya Kiranjana Salakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Vikam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagayate Grim Yat Kripatam Ahmande Shigrim Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Just as aquatics always desire to remain in the vast mass of water, all conditioned living entities naturally desire to remain in the vast existence of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, if someone very great by material calculations fails to take shelter of the Supreme Soul, but instead becomes attached to material household life, his greatness is like that of a young low-class couple. One who is too attached to material life loses all good spiritual qualities. Interesting many points here Prabhupada makes in the purport, and the verse itself also has many points. Say that the Grihastha life is a license for sense gratification, but like many licenses, it runs out after a certain period of time. So here Srila Prabhupada says that when one comes to one's 50th year, then you have to take the Vanaprastha ashram. That's when we retire from materialistic affairs. So that even the typical Vedic way is that one should be trained up as a brahmachari, and then one either remains brahmachari or one enters into household life. There's nothing anything else at that point, unless one takes sannyas later on. And then from householder life, if one is too attached to remain celibate, single student, then one may become a householder. So there's certain license for some kind of material affairs there. But after the age of 50, the one has to make plans to extricate oneself from these entangling things. And failure to do that, Prabhupada says, let's see the exact words, he says crippled. In the Vedic civilization, this type of crippled life is allowed only until one's 50th year. So what's the Sanskrit word for crippled life? Crippled mentality? Yeah, it's very similar to the word cripple. Karpana or kripana. The word kripana means miserly person. So miserly can be, Prabhupada talks about selfishness, and he talks about extended selfishness. So this extended selfishness, what are some of the ways this is manifest? Can anyone say?
Did you ask how this
Extended selfishness, how can this be seen? How does it manifest?
it expands from me and my soul, and then family, society, community?
Society, friendship, and love, Prabhupada calls it. So in the name of love, sometimes people are selfish, but then if there's not a proper reciprocation, then that love stops, doesn't it? So we can see it's, and even nationalism, this type of extended selfishness, it's like why we're putting limits on it, because the devotees meant to see everybody equally. We only love human beings, but we'll kill animals and eat them, or we'll squash a bug because it's annoying me. What right do we have to do that? We're not God, we can't create, we can't take away then. So selfishness, sometimes in the material world, the principle of material existence is I, me, and mine. And sometimes we can be stretched a little beyond that to think of someone else a little bit, but we have to be getting something out of it as well. So this kind of family, society, friendship, love, nationality, we're still getting something out of it. But Prabhupada says this type of crippled mentality, then we should be giving that up. So it's required that in order to do that. So that doesn't really apply to devotees. Prabhupada says that ISKCON is a movement of Paramahamsas, not Paramahamsters, Paramahamsas. Yeah, which means what? What's a Hamsa? Swan. And what is one of the amazing aspects of a swan? What can they do when you give them if you give them a mixture of milk and water? What can they do? They can separate the
Water from the wind.
Yeah. So someone who's a Hamsa or a Paramahamsa, then they're trained to only see the good and try to take the good, try to extract the spiritual essence out of things, and to try to encourage others to be spiritual in their life. So such Paramahamsas. So whether one is, in ISKCON, whether one is Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas, then Prabhupada requires the same commitment, which is 4 regs and 16 rounds. This is a member of ISKCON. It's not just a case of we follow for a little while, we chant for a bit, and then we get a funny name, and then now that we've got the name, we remember we don't have to follow any longer, we don't have to listen to anybody, we've got the badge. My name is now Gobbledygook Dasa, or whatever. We get some funny name. So Krishna consciousness is not a change of name, it's not a change of dress, it's a change of heart. And that change of heart can be there in any ashram. Back to Nod Thakur, the great-grandfather of the Hare Krishna movement. Then he also was the one who foresaw this wonderful temple arising in Sridham Mayapur. So this temple the devotees are building just now, this was foreseen by Bhaktivinoda Thakur back in the 1800s. So he's such a powerful devotee. And he was saying, Grihi tako bani tako nata ke janjal. Whether one is a grihasta or a bani, which means a vanaprastha or a renunciant living in the forest, like vana means forest, then it doesn't matter, just chant Hare Krishna. So, but we have to remain within one of the ashrams. We can't create some other. Seems to be this kind of another ashram called the Bachelorette Ashram, where one is neither committed to being a brahmachari or a grihastha or a vanaprastha or a sannyas. So maybe this is some new Kali Yuga fifth ashram. And naturally, these are the four orders are set up by the Supreme Lord. So in order to come into the one of these four orders, to make that gradual advancement, then at least we can, this is a temporary identification. So there's a nice verse, before we do puja in the morning, we chant this verse, Naham vipro nachana raptina puvaishun sam Naham vani nachana graptina vanasuyati vakintu pro janikala paramananda purnamritabdir gopi bhakti patkamalayo dasa dasa and dasa. So this is a verse which is spoken by Lord Chaitanya. I think it may have been quoted from 10th canto, but basically saying, I'm not a Vipra, not a Brahmin. I'm not a Brahmin. I'm not a Kshatriya. I'm not a Vaishya. I'm not a Sudra. I'm not a Brahmachari. I'm not a Grihastha. I'm not a Vanaprastha. I'm not a Sannyas. But I'm a servant of the servants of the Gopis of Vrindavan. So this is the devotee's eternal identification. We may identify temporarily as male, female, young, old, human, other species, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas, brahmin, shudra, whatever. So we may temporarily identify with this, but that is not our eternal identity. These are just identities we assume, just like someone sticks on a police uniform, and sometimes they say, if you put the uniform on, it will tell you what to do. So someone with a police uniform on, say you decided to do that, and you stood on the street, in a busy street, people would come up to you and say, oh, officer, how do you get to this? Or there's this man harassed me, can you arrest him? Immediately the uniform will tell you what to do, isn't it? So, but we change uniform, then we may change. It's just like when you're at school, they give you a choice of subjects because you can be anything according to the system of education. They're not necessarily trying to understand what's your nature, what's best suited to you. So they just say, no, it's up to you. But how's a teenager meant to decide, what their lifelong occupation may be and stick to it? And therefore many people think they're going to do something, they study something and they stop it and change direction. So there's no real ability within the education system to identify what is the nature of this person, what would they be happiest doing, and how would they fit into society in a very satisfied way. But rather than that, then it creates so much confusion because you have people who are perhaps Sudra by nature trying to do the job of a Brahmin simply because they passed an exam, they were able to remember something. I don't know if any of you have ever sat an exam where you felt you answered the question right according to the actual principle of it, but because you didn't give the verbatim answer which was required, you didn't get the mark, and you felt unfairly denied of that mark. So this is the system of education. It's not so much learning, but just remembering. You don't have to even know it. So therefore, many people, when they're finished their education, they're actually quite bewildered or quite an anxiety about how they're going to apply things in the real world. And therefore, sometimes they get taken on in different ways where they can gradually learn how to apply their theory. So in Krishna consciousness, reading Prabhupada's books, that's providing us with the knowledge we need. So that is a theoretical understanding of it. Beyond that, also, we get purified because we're associating with the pure devotee. But the real understanding comes when we apply it and when we put it into practice. So, for this this crippled life, which has been spoken about, the household life, is only allowed until one's 50th year. One must give up family life and enter either the order of Vanaprastha or sannyas, in which one completely takes shelter with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this gift of old age is there to remind us that we can't live in this body forever. The grey hairs are coming in, the creases are coming. It's like, oh, I feel so young, but I don't look it any longer. And then we see people going to extreme extents trying to stay young. And even you have people who they have businesses which are devoted to trying to convince people they can stay young forever. There's even one called that, isn't it? Stay Young Forever, where they sell certain products to make you look. But what does it do for your insides? Does it make your kidneys any younger? Does it make your arteries any younger? And there's a clock ticking there. It's going to, and at a certain point in time, the batteries run out and the clock will stop, and then the game's over. So we may try to. There's this saying, "Mutton dressed as lamb." Have you ever heard of that one? You know, sometimes some old person, they try to do themselves up to make themselves look young, and it's quite sad, really. You know, it's funny superficially because you see that somebody may have had a dream to have a very typical example is given is to have like maybe a Ferrari sports car, but it's taken them 50 years to save up to get it. By the time they get it, what was the purpose of getting it in the first place? Was, you know, to attract somebody else. But by the time they get to that point, they're no longer attractive themselves. And if they do get some young person attracted to them, the young person's thinking, this person will croak it soon and I'll get their money. So this is the love in the material world. It's so conditional. And Prabhupada says that Maya gives one an idea and we spend our whole lifetime chasing it. For devotees, if they're always engaged in devotional service, then we don't have to retire from material life because we've already given it up. So, but especially for those who are engaged in material activities, then they have to extricate themselves from it. We have to begin to see how things in relation to Krishna. If we become entangled, if his household has become entangled to our situation, then Prabhupada's saying here that 50th year we have to make plans to disentangle ourselves from that. Where one becomes, as the Prabhupada said, enter either the order of Vanaprastha, independent, retired life for cultivation of spiritual knowledge, or sannyas. So it's not recommended here. It says here that in the actual verse, well, actually, beginning of the purport, Prabhupada says, although crocodiles are very fierce animals, they're powerless when they venture out of the water onto land. When they're out of the water, they cannot exhibit their original power. So when we get involved in material activities, then we don't have the original consciousness, we don't have the original power of the unconditioned living entity. So then, just as a crocodile, when it goes back into the water, then it's in a superior position for fighting. Sometimes a crocodile may attack some animal, and if it's dragged out of the water, then the animal who's used to living outside of the water gains an advantage, because the crocodile, although still fierce out of the water, is not in its superior position. And then there's this fight to try to drag the animal back into the water so it can gain power. So if we're feeling powerless in this material world, then we have to increase our Krishna consciousness, get back into the water, where we're in our natural environment. Prabhupada said that the living entity in the material world is in an incompatible situation because we are superior energy and we're trying to enjoy the inferior energy. We're trying to lord over the inferior energy. But only Krishna can do that because we're marginal potency. And the more we try to lord over the material energy, the more we become entangled in our complexities. Just like the topic of the moment is COP26, right? The one thing that they're forgetting is that they cannot lord over the material nature. They might try to avoid this or avoid that, or employ this or employ that. But until they see that actually they're not the owners, they're not the proprietors of this world, and they're not the controllers of it, they don't have complete dominion. Mankind may try, this is nature is telling us, you might try to have dominion over the natural laws, but because we don't abide in harmony with the person who has created these laws of nature, then we're only simply going to take, we're simply going to create some other complication. But this is a bit like the argument, we've had the argument of the knife and the scissors. We use the knife to cut they argue we should use the knife to cut the cloth, no, use the scissors. So we're saying use the knife, and the materialists are saying no scissors. We will still, somehow or another, we can still live like this. We'll just change the type of energy we use, but they're not foreseeing what kind of problems come from that, because we're dealing with finite resources. And because they're not performing yajna, so yajna means sacrifice, yajna vai Vishnu. Sacrifice to please Vishnu must be performed, otherwise work in this material world causes bondage, karma bandhana. So desperately trying to fix something and overlooking the actual cause of what is the problem. It's like one may have boils on the body, which is due to impure blood, which is due to wrong diet. If we simply just blow on the boil, and then another boil comes up, and then we think, oh, we'll put some calamine lotion on this one, I'll do that. Blowing's not working, let's try this. But they're not getting to the actual root of the problem. And they think, oh, I'll lance the boil, but then another boil comes up because impurities are still having to come out. So this is what's happening. And devotees at any age, they don't have to wait until they're 50 to surrender, because what happens if you don't live until you're 50? You'd been thinking, oh, I should have taken to that sooner. A devotee thinks, padam yadvi padam. Step after step there is danger. Therefore, a devotee is attentive to thinking, how can I avoid taking birth again in this material world? Because we see that although people are hoping to fix the ills of the planet, until they stop doing the things which are causing it, then it's still going to happen. One time in the morning walk, one Prabhupada disciple, Prajapati Prabhu, who he just passed away, I think it was earlier on this year, a very intelligent devotee. We knew him from Chaitanya College. And he asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, by all the ugra karma, all the horrible works which are going on in the world, the animal slaughter, abortion, etc., he says, should there not be some very big global reaction for all this which is going on every day? And Prabhupada says yes. And says, so why is it not happening? Is it due to the Sankirtan movement? And Prabhupada says yes, that is the only thing which is holding back the tide of Kali is the Sankirtan movement. So this is the yajna of the devotees, the sacrifice the devotees are making, Sankirtan yajna, by giving out the holy name, giving out prasadam, giving out these books. This is the required yajna, Sankirtan yajna. And then that is actually purifying. So people who are wise enough can see this. And the more people who come to appreciate this, then and take on board these things, then the better. One time even Prabhupada was asked, should we try to make people vegetarian? He says, just encourage them to chant Hare Krishna, everything else will follow. That's the important thing. If we encourage people to chant, because we're not just a vegetarian society, International Society for Vegetarian Consciousness. These things are there. These are all good things. Avoiding intoxication. We see how much problems intoxication causes. It causes families to split up. It causes depression, mental illness, suicide, etc. So many families are put into difficulty because of the ill effects of intoxication, gambling also. So there's these four pillars of spiritual life: cleanliness, austerity, mercy, and what's the other one? Truthfulness. Yeah, and these are in Kali Yuga, they're in short supply. Somehow or other they say that truthfulness is the only leg of Dharma still standing, but it seems it's hard to find as well, isn't it? But also, even people think they're living a truthful life when they're in the illusion that they're this body, just like this word Prabhupada was using here, or the word which is in the actual verse, Sharirinam. It means of all living entities who have accepted material bodies. So Sharira means the body, and Sharirinam means the living entity who have accepted this material body. So we've accepted these bodies because of our karma. We had no choice. We had to accept them. But we don't have to accept the body as a self. And this is what has been spoken about in these transcendental literatures. Of course, we can accept that in theory, we can accept it, but then we have to apply the teachings so that it doesn't just become something that we remember when we're sitting in Bhagavatam class, but actually something we're living at every moment. That's something we have to be aspiring for. And while we accept the body as a self, we do so many things which are adharmic. But the hope is there that Krishna says when you become situated in this boat of transcendental knowledge, you become indifferent to all that has been seen, all has been heard. In other words, he's saying, and also he says that even if you're the most sinful of all sinners, then once we become free from this bodily concept of life and we're situated in knowledge, then we're no longer bound by that previous misidentification. There may be some karmic reaction. When one becomes a devotee, then it's said that one actually only gets a token reaction for what they're due. And sometimes we see this if someone decides to stop being a devotee and they go back to the material way of life, and then very quickly they give up the shelter of the Lord. Very quickly they resume their material activities from where they left off. So it's important that we keep good association, and association which is going to help us make our determination stronger to go forward in Krishna consciousness. And we should be looking for that. And that association which is going to slacken our Krishna consciousness, we have to avoid that. Just like in the Prema Jayani prayers, Vrinda was saying, Sadhu Sangha, Sadhu Seva, or Vaishnav Sangha, Vaishnav Seva. So this association of the devotees, Prabhupada says that one should seek out the association of a pure devotee or devotees, because sometimes we've had this excuse, oh, there's no pure devotees, therefore, don't expect me to surrender. But Prabhupada covers that. He's very thorough. He says one should seek out the association of pure devotees or devotees. So at least, if someone's in the shower getting clean, then we think, well, that person's been in the shower a bit longer than me, and they look a bit cleaner than I am, so I've got faith that this process of standing in the shower, getting cleansed is going to work. what to speak of if we see someone who's been in the shower and completely cleansed. Just like sometimes people, if they play some sports on a wet field or something like that, like rugby, football or something, they get really muddy. So we get very much contaminated by connection with the material world. And the material world, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that Maya, or the material world, makes an ass of the living entity. She makes a real fool of us. And the more we realise we're not this body, that we are actually something different from this, the more we become embarrassed about the things we've accepted. And that's a healthy sign. If we're embarrassed about who we were or who we thought we were and what we did and what we thought was something in knowledge or we thought was something good or just grossed out, to be embarrassed about that is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. No, it's not just that we have to feel good, otherwise, feeling good, sometimes we have to feel a bit shameful or a bit not so proud of ourselves, a bit humbled. To feel like that is actually a good thing for spiritual life, because then it means we're taking it seriously, and it will guard against us going back into that again. So as Prabhupada here is talking about vanaprastha or sannyas, then there's a term known as vantasi, sannyasi, which doesn't just refer to one who's taken a sannyas danda and puts on a dhoti without the tail at the back, but it refers to one who's given up material life, taken to spiritual life, and then once again goes back to material life. So I think I speak for all of us when I say that we came to Krishna consciousness and we've taken up Krishna consciousness to whatever degree we have, because we feel that it's something progressive for our own personal spiritual development. And we see that this is the principles of it are leading to something higher, and we're leaving something lower behind. We're getting a higher taste. But if we become attracted by the material energy again, now becoming attracted can be there because Maya can be very attractive, especially if we've got conditioned mind. That can be the case, but then we have to take shelter in Krishna. And sometimes that means just simply chanting Hare Krishna, or it may mean revealing our mind to another devotee. Even in material sense, they say that problem shared is a problem halved. Because the last thing the mind wants us to do is reveal our problem, isn't it? It wants us to keep that to ourselves. Don't let anybody in on this secret. It's too embarrassing. It's too shameful. But there's nothing new under the sun. So whatever might be our particular flavour of Maya, it's not something which hasn't been tried by somebody else in the material world before. And Krishna doesn't hold anything against us whatsoever. So in order to maintain ourselves in Krishna consciousness, then we learn to take shelter of Krishna. When there's some adverse situations, being in the material world always presents some adverse situations. Some days we go through it and it's nothing too much troublesome. Then other days we go through and attachments are coming up, or someone says something or does something that disturbs us, and we have to find the strength to continue. Prabhupada said that even in the association of devotees, we will not find utopia. Even in the spiritual world, there's not utopia. But actually, when there's surrender to the Lord, then this is even more so than utopia. Because by being connected with the Lord, then we gradually become qualified to enter into the Lord's eternal pastimes, which are ecstatic, full of bliss and full of knowledge. And they're ever fresh, just as the Lord is ever fresh, his pastimes are ever fresh. And the living entities are always inspired to serve in that atmosphere. Prabhupada said that the material world is a very difficult place to be a devotee, and therefore Krishna is especially compassionate upon the living entities who are trying to be a devotee within the material world. because he knows how difficult it is for us. Especially we've become very much, we've developed affinity for material energy. He refers to it as our second nature, but it's not our first nature. It's only our second nature. And when there's difficulty, sometimes by our second nature, we just want to take shelter of what we usually take shelter of, whether it be our opinion, intoxication, an attitude, some type of sense gratification or whatever. So the more we learn to take shelter of Krishna in adverse circumstances, the more we're becoming advanced. One senior devotee once told me, he says that when you get chastised, your level of advancement is measured by how quick you accept that chastisement. If it takes you like days to accept it, and finally you feel like, oh, I've got no choice to accept it, otherwise I'm done for. Or if you never accept it, or if you accept it immediately, so I'm such a fool, I should have known better. And if you feel like, oh, I should have came to that sooner, then we think, okay, the next time I get some direction, some chastisement or something, then let me just try to take that on board quickly. And some long argument in our mind for hours or days, or just never accepting. So it's important that we understand what is required of us as a devotee, and we try to live up to that, and we try to identify with that. There's one Prabhupada disciple once told us that he said that when Maya presents something there to distract you from Krishna, something which may be attractive, then just say, no, I'm a devotee. A devotee doesn't do that. So we start to identify, even though it may be a little bit artificial at first, we have to convince ourselves. So, but that convincing is not false because we are a devotee. Yeah, so as we were saying in the beginning of the class, when the pujaris, they say this verse at the beginning of doing puja, because regardless of outside of the altar, whether they're acting as a brahmachari, a grihasta, or whatever, when they come before the Lord, they're coming as a dasanudas, or dasyanudas. We're not thinking, I'm Brahmin, I'm worshipping the Lord, or, I'm whatever we might think we are. Or so we're trying to, even if in our daily life, we still misidentify with ourselves when we go before the deities, then we try to identify simply as a devotee of the Lord. So we talk about darshan, about seeing the deities, isn't it? We say, okay, 7 o'clock darshan. But the darshan goes two ways. The deities are seeing us also. And we're saying, okay, here I am again, Lord, fool number 1. Please help me become a better devotee. We're presenting ourselves so the Lord can see us. Okay, yesterday I tried to do some service, but I got in an argument. Sorry about that. Help me to do it with as a devotee the next time. So we do make mistakes. That's a process of learning, means that, if we are going to make some mistakes, but making mistakes is not the end of it. We carry on. That's why also every morning, first thing is vanchakalpatarubhyascha, be clearing any offences we may have done, which may be a hindrance on the path. We want to clear that so we can chant properly. What's the first offence against the holy name? Sadhunanda means
offences to Vaishnavas.
Yeah, to ninda the sadhus, to offend the Vaishnavas. So sometimes we do that. And we might even be doing it every day, but at least try to become aware of it. Not when we say vanchakalpa, it shouldn't just be, okay, now it's time to rattle this one out, and then it's just, we're not even listening to it. But we should be looking to see, how am I doing this? How am I committing offence against the Vaishnavas? Those who have dedicated life to propagation of the Lord's holy name throughout the world. So that doesn't necessarily mean to say it's someone senior to us, it could be someone junior. Someone is any devotee who's dedicated their life to the Lord, we should be careful not to offend them. It's not that only younger devotees can offend older devotees. There's also jiva aparad, which means even the living entities who are not devotees, we can offend them. So to try to meditate on these 10 offences in order we become aware of how are they in our life. We think, oh, I'm not worshipping any demigods, I don't need to worry about that one. But if we've got a karmakanda type of mentality, then we're kind of treating Krishna like a demigod. So therefore, when we become aware of these offences and how they apply to us in our daily life, and we work to try to become free from these offences, then therefore very quickly the desired success is achieved, Krishna Prema. So this is, although we say these things almost mechanically every morning, it doesn't have to be mechanical. It's only mechanical if we're not trying to be conscious of it, trying to understand it and imbibe and live the meaning. Now, Prabhupada didn't give us this morning program with those particular things in it simply out of some kind of blind tradition. It was all purposeful to help make our path better. Chana Pisine Chana. It means if we want to chant the holy name of the Lord constantly, which means that we don't want to commit so many offences that we eventually lose the taste for chanting and we don't continue to chant, or that our chanting becomes so pure that, as Prabhupada said, 16 rounds on the beads minimum and unlimited off the beads. So we're always satatam kirtayantamam. Krishna says satatam, always chant. Just like they were reading the Prabhupada Lilamrita, Prabhupada was dreaming. He's dreaming about preaching. He's dreaming about spreading Krishna consciousness. So a devotee can be engaged in service 24 hours a day. Probably we all experience that in our dreams. We start to dream about serving Krishna. And we dream about, I've even heard devotees talking in their sleep about, stopping people on the street trying to sell them a book. One devotee was lying in his sleeping bag, we were in the motorhome, and he kind of jumped up in his bed and goes, "Excuse me, take a book." He was still in his sleep, but then he went back down again. He probably woke up and we should ask him, "So what's your Sanktan score for last night when you were sleeping?" But this is what happens. It's just like whatever we, throughout our day, whatever's becoming our focus, throughout our regular daily life, that's what is going on in our sleep as well. So if we're working for Krishna, we're serving Krishna, we're thinking, we're chanting, and we're cultivating nice relationships with Krishna's devotees, whether they're pure devotees or aspiring to be, then in our sleep also will be like that. And that means even if you die in your sleep, you're thinking of Krishna. So let's not take any chances. Let's make this process of Krishna consciousness alive. To begin with, Prabhupada says that devotional service may appear mechanical because we're having to kind of mechanically stop things and then replace it with another lifestyle. But it has to take on meaning. If it just remains on a mechanical platform, all that will happen is that we just switch off to it. We think, there's no point in listening to class, we'll just sleep through it. Or there's no point in listening to my japa, I'll just chant anything. Doesn't really matter as long as my lips are moving for the next 2 hours. So that's not going to awaken our pure Krishna consciousness. We're cheating ourselves. The only person we're cheating is ourselves. We're not even cheating Krishna because Krishna doesn't depend on us for anything. He doesn't need anything from us. So do ourselves a favor and make this Krishna consciousness real. Try to absorb it, be conscious. Prabhupada says before we become Krishna conscious, we must become conscious. Therefore, seeing everything as Krishna's, treating everything and everyone as Krishna's property, Krishna's part and parcel. In this way, we actually leave behind our false ego of pride and of being a controller, being an enjoyer. And then we really enjoy because the living entity is full of bliss. This is when actually the bliss starts to come through, when we identify as a devotee. Because then we don't require anything of the material world. We're not dependent on anything. Everyone in material consciousness is dependent on something material. It's funny because sometimes people accuse theists of using God as a crutch. But what crutches do they have? You know, if you think back and you see what crutches we had in the material world, we gave up those crutches. And now we're walking without those crutches. We're in a healthier state, isn't it? You know, if we don't get any money, it's not going to stop us from chanting Hare Krishna or having kirtan. You know, I'm sure the Lord will still provide prasadam somehow or another. But if people's money is somehow or another stopped, then they're in great anxiety. They're thinking, my happiness has stopped. Depression sets in. So their crutches are actually so fallible, whereas our crutch is infallible. So make our crutch Krishna. Whenever we're feeling some weakness, then lean on Krishna. And when we take shelter in Krishna, Prabhupada says that Krishna is bound to give you that shelter. And here it's been described that for some time, you know, if you feel you need to still connect in the material world, then you can become grihastha for a little while. But at this point in time, you have to stop. And you have to start getting your act together before it's too late. But if we can avoid that altogether, then that's even better. Okay, we'll just stop there. Has anyone got any questions or comments? ISKCON Guruvinda ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Sai Gaur Premanande, Haribol.
Prabhupada, Prabhu ki.
Gaura Bhakti.